There you go. Oh, we're doing a recording too. Yeah, so yeah, this is Abigail Watson of the open source JavaScript community, co-chair of the HO7 patient empowerment work group, and now at MITRE. One of the projects that I was asked to pick up on was sponsored by Tranquil Data, who has also been in the sessions, and and I was asked to look at consent implementations. And so we've been running the Passio, Gravity, and Leap data through Node on FHIR. And I'm going to do a very quick, kind of screencast and show you what we've been up to. So when I was asked to do a survey of all the different consent technologies, first thing that came to mind was Passio, and that there were advanced directives. I thought that I'd find a consent record in there. I didn't, but went there first to see what kind of stuff was in there. And the Node on FHIR application lets us like customize it's a open source JavaScript implementation, and we can theme it and configure it to different clients and sponsors. It's got some import-export technology. So I started importing the Passio artifacts, and there were goals and lists and observations and organizations and patients. Actually, this is a little backwards. It started here, then we imported it. There were care teams created, and the goals and the lists, and we loaded up all the observations, and it was all great, but no consent records. So we went to Gravity and did the same thing. We did a survey there to look at the interoperability, and can we load up all the data? Can we get a consent? Which stuff is overlapping, and is it, and kind of validating the interoperability of it. So again, we loaded up all the artifacts, loaded them in. There were Gravity differs from Passio in that it has more support for the questionnaires and questionnaire responses, also service requests, and we found the consent record for Colin Abbas was our first patient. We got the organizations in there, we got the observations, they were loading in correctly, and the same questionnaire responses were coming in. We verified with Postman. We did bundle fetches on the consent records and verified that on the Connectathon aspect that we were able to connect two different systems, being Postman and Node on FHIR. We did the same for spot checking individual consent records, more consent records. And then this week, upon watching the videos, I was like, well, let me run and do the Leap implementation and see what artifacts are in Leap and see if we can load those in. Again, we were loading the data in, lots of observations, lots of patient data there. Questionnaires, the questionnaires were really high value. Let's see here, there were the dozen or so patients, got all the organizations in, and then we started pulling in the questionnaires. I will note that the questionnaires coming in on Leap are coded differently than Gravity. The questionnaire parser that we used mostly loads the Gravity questionnaires correctly, but the Leap questionnaires are somewhat broken in it. And so we're one of the learnings that we are taking from the Connectathon is that the Leap questionnaires and the Gravity questionnaires need some harmonization, and or our questionnaire parser needs updating. It needs more functionality.
What was this something that you got a chance to kind of narrow down, like how things are different?
Yeah, well, so this is a pretty common one. The questionnaire resource is general purpose, and it's a nested recursive structure. And there tends to be a difference in how people code up with section titles, and whether a form or a questionnaire has sections or not, or whether it's like nested sections. And that is, it's a gnarly like it's it,
Right.
it's going to be hard to nail down. Yeah, so it's there's just some discrepancy between the two right now.
Fair enough.
Yep, yep. Going on, I loaded up the different ones, NDA and all of them, and they were all kind of consistently not the same, but they were consistent in that regard. And then this is the survey taker, which wasn't working quite as expected, but we'll go back and see what we can do about it. So this is a takeaway. The three different implementation guides that we surveyed for advanced directives and consent records, we noticed organization and patient were common to all three. Passio and Gravity had great overlap, and basically Gravity included all the resources that Passio had and more. Whereas Leap was particularly, it differentiated itself by being much more practitioner clinician focused, and that's also represented in the CDS hooks. It dealt like Passio and Gravity could both be stood up, I would dare say, as patient only aspects, patient or practitioner, whereas Leap seems to require a clinician workflow. Also, consent and questionnaire were specific to Gravity and Leap. And the Passio project has sort of managed to, according to the IG that I was looking at, maybe it wasn't the latest version, need to check on some of that. But from my survey, it appeared that Passio has managed to kind of do the advanced directives by skirting around consent and questionnaire altogether, and that's kind of interesting. But consent and questionnaire were well shared between Gravity and Leap, and there should be good interoperability there. Lastly, on a report out, Tranquil Data gave us some scenarios, and going forward, there were two scenarios. One was about a teenage girl who was had a prescription for contraceptives and moves locations from Alabama to Massachusetts, and what the consent process is and differs between different states, different US states. And then the second scenario was about her father, who was using a online pharmacy fulfillment application, and granted access to one application, and then decided it didn't suit his needs and moved to a second application. And what does the revoking of consents look like? And so we went through an exercise, and we coded up these two scenarios into FHIR records, made the relating endpoints, and looked at a similar type of Venn diagram of what would be the commonalities, the interoperability between those different scenarios. And again, we found patient and organization being the two central ones, but also consent. But that was partially because we defined the scenarios in that way. And so going forward in our work with a consent engine implementation guide that we're working on, we're going to be probably focusing on these three first. That seems to be a learning of from this Connectathon. And we have some basic utilities on a HIPAA consent authorization form, and it generates the consents, and then the Postman API access, and we're going to be concentrating on those probably as the first step, and based on review and survey of the existing implementation guides. And yeah, and we also support the patient and organization endpoints. And yeah, that's my report out.
Thank you so much. This was very insightful. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Very interesting. So this, thanks, Abigail. So this is the end of the track. It's usually when we discuss any issues or recommendations moving forward related to consent management, decision enforcement, and computable consent. So I'll open the floor. And I did want to bring up one thing. During our demonstration of modifying the informed consent for a medication request, I was trying to update the category code to the consent itself, and I needed to actually update the consent or the status code for the medication request to put it back on hold. So that was just a user error on my part for failing that portion of the demonstration. So I'm just curious, Abigail, are you able to generate consents based on those use cases that I produced for this track? Are you able to generate those and then test it against the various systems?
Well, we have all the endpoints, and let me put it this way, is I have done the prep work for now actually connecting, or it's like, this was more of a prep work connectathon, but we have a complete rig, complete implementation that's ready to start querying external systems. And yes-ish, I would hazard yes, but that's going to be like the next step.
Okay, great, super. I'm interested in seeing what your results are. And again, these systems will be available to you, the back-end decisioning portion of that and whatnot in your investigations. So
yeah, so how long are they going to be online? Are they permanently online, or like, are they going to close out in the next 2 weeks or something? Or like,
they'll be up there for roughly about 2 years.
Oh, perfect. So we're going to be.
So the code is going to be there in perpetuity on GitHub. The live artifacts are going to be, they've been charged for what we estimated to be almost 2 years.
Right. Okay. So we're going to be starting for the like we're going to be funded or working, meeting updates for the next 3 or 4 months for Q4, and basically we're kicking off now for a more thorough, complete connectivity round of connection in January. So I'm going to be working through all the use cases over the next 3 months, and come around January, we're going to be, we're going to be pushing some of that Tranquil data over, and actually kind of trying to hit all 3 of these implementation guides.
Perfect.
Paul, did you have any questions?
Nope, thanks. Just here to observe.
Okay. So at this point, Mohammed and I will go off and complete the report out as our last task for this track. I really appreciate everybody joining. There's a lot of information yet again, and there's still a lot of work to be done. And that's it for me.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks everyone for joining. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Abigail, for
presenting.
demonstrating that. That was really good.
Thanks
Thank
all.
you.
Thanks a lot, Dwayne. I'll talk
Okay,
to you soon.
bye.